So thank you everyone for joining us for the expert peer exchange on soft tissue sarcoma. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. T. Raja, who is the Director of Medical Oncology at Apollo Cancer Center, Chennai. And his panelists are Dr. N.K. Warrior, who is a Director and Senior Consultant, Department of Medical Oncology at MVR Cancer Center and Research Institute at Calicut. Dr. Poonam Patil, Senior Consultant, Department of Medical Oncology, Manipal Hospitals, Bangalore. Dr. Kripa Shankar, Consultant, Department of Medical Oncology, NSR CanCure Center, Coimbatore. Dr. Ashish Singh, Professor and HOD, Department of Medical College, Christian Medical College, Department of Medical Oncology, Christian Medical College, Vellore. And Dr. Bhavesh Parekh, Senior Consultant, Department of Medical Oncology, Shalby Hospitals, Ahmedabad. And with that, I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Raja, sir. Over to you, sir.
So you will have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. That's a very short introduction. Thank you so much for a quick introduction. Kashish, thanks for putting us all together. Esai, thanks for putting us all together. My sincere apologies that I was caught in the traffic and came to the section. I'm so sorry. And so I welcome all my panelists to be here. We're just going to discuss on the, little bit on the length and breadth of the soft tissue sarcoma, and try to focus on welcome Dr. Warrior, Dr. Bhavesh, and Dr. Kripa Shankar, and Dr. Poonam, and I'm missing anyone else?
Ashish Singh.
Dr. Ashish, oh my God, yesterday only I heard a wonderful debate by Dr. Ashish. Okay, here we go. This is the agenda. Overview of, first a quick overview of what is there in the soft tissue sarcoma. How do we look at it? And then we move on to the management. In the management, I thought we will look at the advanced disease, and we'll then look at the first line treatment, and then we will look at second line treatment, and then what are the emerging options. So that's what I thought I will focus, and it's going to be a free-flowing two-way discussion, so absolutely fine. And I see that Parvish Bhai is visible, so I may throw a couple of questions to him also. So my first question to Bhavesh. Bhavesh, good evening. How are you? And now, Bhavesh, common histologies and subtypes I have put here. So what do you think is the common histology, common subtypes that you see? And then the other pie chart is about the site, common sites that are there. This is a paper published in 2014. Annals of Surgery. This is mostly Western data, doesn't matter. So what is your take on the disposition of this disease, Dr. Bhavesh?
I feel that the common site, first of all, or common histology, if we consider the leiomyosarcoma, is the most commonly, generally we are, again, the organ is the uterus. And the more common, again, the extremity, like lower limb leiomyosarcoma or sarcomatous involvement of the upper part, upper extremity is also very common. The second most or third most is the gastrointestinal stromal tumor, or the GIST, is also very commonly seen in India. So these are the histology where if we feel the site, then again I feel the retroperitoneal or intra-abdominal is the more common sometimes. And second one, I feel that upper extremities or the lower extremities sarcoma is more common as site in India or in our center in Gujarat also.
Thank you, Bhavesh. Thank you for your good introduction. Now, I'll turn to Dr. Ashish. Ashish, you are in a major institution, and my apologies, I just missed your name. What is the type, subtypes, and pattern and all that you see, Dr. Ashish?
Yes, sir. So for extremities, I think it all varies based on age group. In adults, when we talk about soft tissue sarcomas, a major chunk, I would say, is just undifferentiated or poorly differentiated. And I think 30 to 40% of our times, pathologists are not able to pinpoint and give a name to the sarcoma. And that's the main reason they'll say is the biopsy tissue itself is too small for us to do. So the report will just say spindle cell sarcoma. On the other hand, sometimes if the immunohistochemistry is supportive, then many times it is we get synovial sarcomas, we get in the retroperitoneum we will have liposarcoma or leiomyosarcomas, and rarely in abdomen we have things like alveolar soft part sarcoma, and one of the rarer ones. Then going into the bone, it's a totally different thing, like chondrosarcomas, osteosarcoma. Little younger age group, it will be Ewing sarcoma and those round cell sarcomas. Even younger, it will be alveolar, those rhabdomyosarcomas. So it's not one disease based on the age group, based on the location, our frequencies changes.
Absolutely, Dr. Ashish. That's the most important, point about sarcomas. There are many, and they are in different places. So it really, really needs a lot of, time into it to really understand the nuances of everything. That's what I think you have conveyed the message perfectly. Dr. Poonam Patil, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good.
Thank you, madam. See, this is the paper STS in India. I have just put the gist of the paper. Basically, it says 60 to 80% of the tumors present more than 10 centimeter. That's again, criteria for resection and radiation. Most of them present in 3rd to 5th decade, and generally they are intermediate to high grade. So this is, and lower extremities are more common than upper. So what is our experience in India? What do you think? Does this reflect your what you have?
I would agree with what Dr. Bhavesh had said earlier, that we also see retroperitoneal primaries as more common, and that is where we get such massive tumors, and which are kind of undetected initially. And yes, most of the times the resection is not curative, and they have metastases at the time of diagnosis as well. So whatever is said here, yes, retroperitoneal primary, and sometimes even the thigh, the lower limbs. In thighs also, we do see large primaries.
Thank you, Dr. Poonam. Dr. Kripa Shankar, good evening. See, this is the same paper. This is the histopathological subtypes from 188 patients. And as Dr. Bhavesh said, and as Poonam madam said, that's what we see in India, and they really emphasized on the abdominal diseases. But then what is your experience? You have been in both major institutes and also now in peripheral centers. You are now in tertiary centers. So what is your experience, Dr. Prashankar?
So definitely, sir, I'd probably agree with what Dr. Ashish has already said as well. Definitely, it depends on the center where you're working at, because then you're bound to see a lot of extremity sarcomas as well. For example, I go to an ortho center. I get a lot of referrals where one of the extremity sarcomas are actually more common. And the L-type sarcomas, I'd agree that they are the most common subtypes. And probably I would say extremity sarcomas are the most common type of sarcomas that I get to see in practice, especially the lower extremity sarcomas, followed then by the retroperitoneal sarcomas closely, sir. I would say definitely, I would agree with what you put up on the slide as well. I think that's a fair reflection of what we see in everyday practice as well.
Yeah, of course, if you go to Ganga Hospital, you don't even remember that there is an abdomen, there is a chest. You will know only extremities and bone. It's a sea of extremities. Totally agreed. So it all depends on where you practice, and I think you have exemplified within the small part of our country itself. You see such wide display of heterogeneity. So that's fully understood. So Dr. Warrior is on the vehicle, but he has some connectivity issues. But I hope that he will be able to.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
But Warrior, all our guys said this, and this is one of the important, opinion on this. It says that because soft tissue sarcomas are rare, and there are more than 50 histological subtypes, so it's very important to refer them to a high volume center, and it has to be managed by a multidisciplinary team of patho, med surgeon, so on and so forth. So MDT. So what is your thought on this, Dr. Varia?
Absolutely right. Because this involves a lot of expertise, and people expect, as previous speakers pointed out, 60% of soft tissue sarcomas are in the extremities and the limb salvage, and very often they are presenting with a large tumor of size 10 to 15 centimeter, and so they expect that the limb should be salvaged. So giving proper expertise, I think it should be a team of a multidisciplinary team who can look into all the parameters so that the outcome will be better. Especially the centers like us, where we offer neoadjuvant chemo, radiation, or sometimes chemotherapy, and then we will try to salvage the limb if it is huge in size. And though the success rate is small, but we do have a very good multidisciplinary team, including a bone tumor specialist, so that we can they plan the treatment in a better way. So including pathologist is also a very important part of multidisciplinary team, and pathologist who is an expert in the sarcoma is a very important person in that multidisciplinary team, who can give us some idea about the histology, so that we will know the we will know the outcome of the treatment. So the multidisciplinary team is an essential part, and I feel that I think almost now it's not a problem. Like all major centers will be having a team to take care of these soft tissue sarcomas.
No, totally agreed. And this is sometimes it looks like most of our meetings neglected disease, but it is so unique and so kind of varied, heterogeneous. It really needs a lot of expertise to, and you would also see that people really take up. They want to be lung specialists, they want to be breast specialists, even among us. How many of us are really keen on, some of us, I know of them, but less number of people really finally settle down on sarcoma. So that's, so now coming to one important aspect of surgery, and I can talk to Parvish Bhai on this, if he, Parvish Bhai, if he can join us. There's a very general question about the expertise of surgery, completeness of surgery. In the limb, there are compartments, that's fine. Compartment resections are well known, bones, margins, but in abdomen, again, so what is your thought process on the expertise of surgeon and achieving R0 resection? And how practical is that in our setting, Dr. Parvish Bhai?
Sorry, sir. Parikh sir is not logged in with audio, sir.
Okay, I'm so sorry to do that. Then I will come back to our Dr. Bhavesh. Bhavesh, surgeon's contribution in sarcoma, particularly you talked about the abdominal disease. So achieving R0 resection in retroperitoneal.
Mostly from my point of view, I feel that, sir, in Gujarat, most of the times this retroperitoneal sarcomas is with a huge swelling, like 8 centimeter, 12 centimeter, 17 centimeter. And most of the time R0 resection is not possible. Just they take a biopsy, and sometimes now with a good PET scan or good MR angio or CT angio, they are able to visualize or able to identify that this is a neurovascular bundle, can be sacrificed, or we cannot really operate. So most of the time I feel that it is the biopsy and it is the surgically inoperable. That is the harsh reality of India or in Gujarat state.
Okay. Ashish, this is about retroperitoneal soft tissue sarcomas, JCO. And the need to aggressively resect, and by simply achieving an extended resection, even in the absence of clear tumor involvement, just an extended resection and standard resection. So you would see a huge difference in 5-year local recurrence rate, 29%, and probably almost double So Granchi et al. So abdomen resection. What is your thought, Ashish?
Yes, sir. I think that this is an area which is where we need very skilled people. And this is something which is again requires a multidisciplinary effort, because even at our center, when we have these large sarcomas, many times the resection would involve, even in the abdomen, they call it compartmental resection. So they would rather take out everything in that compartment. So sometimes it may involve removing the kidneys, removing a splenectomy or a distal pancreatectomy. And even sometimes vessel resection, vascular grafts needs to be put in. So even there, and the more you do it, the better you become, the more skilled you become. So we need a team which is dedicated towards this kind of surgery. Not every unit can handle compartmental resection, and they get better with experience. And many times we have there will be urologists called in, there will be vascular surgeons called in, and there will be other experts, hepatobiliary surgeons called in to make this R0 possible. And the surgeries go on for 10 hours, 12 hours. So everything is very skilled, and therefore even Dr. Granchi and all that. I mean, even in Italy, he works in Italy. Even in the Europe, I mean, if there are these bigger tumors, people from other European countries will refer the patients to go to Italy and see Dr. Granchi. So it's so I would say expertise here is very difficult to come by, and there are very few centers who can do that.
Totally
Especially
agree.
for the larger tumors.
Totally agreed. Now we are talking about the primary site resection, but what about being aggressive on the metastatic?
Raja, one important question,
Sorry,
doubt.
Yeah.
Whether this retroperitoneal sarcoma, it is very difficult to convince our surgeons to even do a R1 dissection. Sometimes because of the pressure effects and the patient is symptomatic, but they are not very keen on doing surgery. Is there any role for R1 dissection in retroperitoneal?
I mean, I don't know whether there is a role, but I can only show the. If you're able to hear us, Dr. Warrior, I think there is a definite difference if you can achieve R0 and an extended resection. So these are all outcome data. There were several other papers on retroperitoneal sarcomas. There are papers on liposarcoma, abdominal resections and all, but I thought it would be too much of a surgical dissection. I didn't bring it. I think the point emphasis is that surgery completeness and radicalness of surgery is very, very important. But actually, there were some papers. I didn't. I wish I had. There were some papers which had questioned about the. I looked into those papers, but I thought I won't be able to do justice to that discussion because I'm not. So I didn't bring it up. So your point is taken, Dr. Poonam. What do you think about what Dr. Warrior is asking? Is there a role for some sort of a less than optimal surgery?
Yeah, so it just becomes kind of a debulking surgery, and which many times patients do land up with that because they have been opened up somewhere thinking that they will be undergoing an optimal reduction, but the surgeons are not able to do so, and they just debulk something and then close the abdomen and send the patients to us. So even if we don't want that, they do land up in that situation. And yes, in our hospital also, the surgeons do try to do complete debulking surgery, but rarely they do end up not being able to remove the entire disease. And
yeah, I think the reality, yes. But actually there were some interesting papers as late as 2018. But I sincerely thought that it will be difficult for me to handle those discussions because I didn't want to get into that. But there were. But on the other hand, most of them did talk about. Now, what about Kripa Shankar? Leave alone talking about the primary. This is pulmonary resection, and what the collection of these papers, right from 1992 to as late as 17 something, all of them say one thing, that postoperative mortalities have really come down with pulmonary metastatectomy, has reached up to 0 in all these expert hands as went on, and 5-year survival has, in all these resected patients, it has stayed around 25 to 30%. And you deal a lot with limb sarcomas. And this is another paper by Dr. Neil Chadgar. And this is again about 800 patients who underwent pulmonary metastatectomy. And this is, up till 2014. And here is where it stands. If you look at the curves, overall survival at the end of 6-7 years is around 25%. So 5-year survival was 34%. So your comments, Dr. Kripashankar.
So I think, sir, just like in all the other malignancies where we're talking about this oligometastatic disease and probably going in with a possible curative intent in those patients as well, I think probably here as well, I would definitely consider the biology of the disease and the chemosensitive histology, whether histology to me really plays a huge part, and also the biology of the disease. For example, if somebody is relapsed after, let's say, 4 or 5 years and has got only probably a couple of lung metastases, then I would definitely be looking at doing a pulmonary metastectomy in that patient. And again, the histology matters. Like I said, if somebody's got an alveolar soft part sarcoma or a clear cell sarcoma or a dedifferentiated liposarcoma or an endometrial stromal sarcoma, these are the sarcomas that I know are not going to be chemosensitive as well. So those sort of patients, yes, especially if they've got a very limited lung disease, got a good biology, they can go on for a long time, I would definitely look at contemplating metastectomy in these patients.
Okay. It'll be interesting to look at how aggressive, in some sensitive diseases, osteosarcomas, can we push the envelope, remove metastasis disease, and then there is a little bit of a competition match between our surgeons. I removed 10, I removed 15, I removed 20. It's nice to hear all that one, but outcome makes a difference. But I do believe that aggression is completely justified at this point. That's what I take home. But now we'll move on to the first line systemic therapies for unresectable and metastatic soft tissue sarcoma. These are the important papers. See, the doxorubicin plus minus ifosfamide and the EORTC paper, that, and then gemcitabine, docetaxel, Geddes, and then we have, we'll come to the second line option and first line option. So I'll come to, this time I'll try to change the sequence. I'll begin with Dr. Poonam. What are your thoughts on first line options? What is your conventional option? What is your favorite go-to regimen?
Yeah, doxorubicin and ifosfamide, because most of the soft tissue sarcomas are sensitive to doxorubicin, and that would be my first choice.
Okay, so the median PFS is 7.4 months in that approach, and median overall survival is 14.3 months. But if you look at the GEM-DOSI, which is again also a highly recommended first line option, you would see a median overall survival of 16 months and a median PFS of almost the same. So is there a way to pick and choose between the two? Dr. Ashish, can you take that question? Tell us between the two, what would you want?
Sir, I think anthracyclines are clearly the most effective agents in terms of response rates. And whenever we combine a second agent, whether it is ifosfamide or whether it's dacarbazine, you do get it again in PFS with no gain in overall survival. Now, your question is comparing the trial you're showing is single agent doxorubicin versus GEM-DOSI. And then we see that this trial was actually designed to actually show that GEM-DOSI may be superior, but they failed to do so. And we know that actually nothing beats anthracycline in this disease. But having said that, and also most of the GEM-DOSI data comes from leiomyosarcoma, mainly uterine sarcomas. Yes. I agree, even from other sarcomas. So I go with histology. So if there is a leiomyosarcoma, I am comfortable in using GEM-DOSI upfront, because I know at least it's as good as anthracyclines and less toxic, and I reserve anthracyclines for later. But however, if it's in any other sarcomas, I would probably prefer anthracyclines before GEM-DOSI.
Totally agreed. Go with the histology. So that's a very key point you said. Bhavish, I have put in the major side effects between these two important first line options. The GEM-DOSI was versus single agent doxorubicin. Again, the ifosfamide doxorubicin was also versus single agent doxorubicin. But here is the difference: the neutropenia and febrile neutropenia is 40% in the doxorubicin plus ifosfamide, and it's around 10 to 20%, let's say in the gem dose. That's the important difference. But otherwise, everything else, fatigue, this and that is. What is your go-to regimen, Bhavesh? Would you pick and choose based on the different histologies, or do you have some liking?
Again, sir, since so many years, it was the anthra plus ifosfamide. That is our first priority for most of the sarcomas. But since very short time, also 6 months or 1 year, the availability of ifosfamide is a big problem. Okay. So I still feel that gemdosi is a very good friendly, or as far as the neutropenia is concerned and other toxicity is concerned, gemdosi is a very good option. But as far as the response rate or PFS or OS, I still feel that to use anthracycline in a metastatic or unresectable is my drug of choice.
Okay. So, and is there anything beyond that? Dr. Kripashankar, what about these exciting molecules, Olaratumab? And there is a mixed signal, that I get out of this, anti-PDGFR, and this phase 2 trial, with Olaratumab plus doxorubicin versus doxorubicin, that's the curves. And here is the PFS of 6.6 months versus 4.1. And this is the OS, and 26 months versus 14 months. That looks too impressive for me. And the investigators would conclude that the primary endpoint is met, so on and so forth. But the phase 3 trial announced actually kind of said that it is, I think it's a negative trial, so to say, 2019 JCO. So what is that signal that we are getting, Kripashankar? Is this an addition or not?
So I think this is very important data, sir. If I remember, especially the ASCO 2019 plenary session, this was a negative trial and also highlights the issue of why we shouldn't be falling back only on phase 2 data. Because the FDA, I think, probably rushed into this and gave an accelerated approval for this drug based on phase 2 data. But like you've rightly shown us, based on the phase 3 data, that was negative. They could not meet the primary endpoint of improvement in overall survival. And hence, they pulled the plug on this drug. So it no longer is a recommended option. And probably, this study also goes on to highlight the fact that, too much of reliance on probably phase 2 data is never a great thing. And probably, that's why we'll have to wait for phase 3 data. And that's what you've rightly shown here, sir. So to me, definitely not an option, because this was tried, especially in the elderly subset, thinking that, okay, fine, they could probably overcome the toxicities. But unfortunately, they could not do that even with the phase 3 announced data that you've shown us.
Totally agreed. Totally agreed. I think I was eagerly looking at this drug a couple of years ago, but that's what I learned. And so anyway, we are holding on. Dr. Warrior is still traveling. He has messaged me. I think he will join a little later. So we'll come back to him. So I'm going to Ashish. Ashish, in general, the post first line options. This is the landscape for post first line. This is the pasopanib data palette, and we get a median PFS of 4.6 months, OS of 12 months, and eribulin we get a OS of 13 months and a PFS of 2.6 months, and trabectedin PFS of 1.5 months. These are three important drugs. So what is your take, Dr. Ashish?
Sure, sir. So I think when we talk about the second line space, it all depends on, again, number one, the histology, the patient's comorbidities, and also the volume of the disease and how rapidly the disease is growing. Many times, like we have to stop anthracyclines after 4 or 6 cycles because beyond that it's cardiotoxic and patient doesn't tolerate. But we are left with only a stable disease, and the disease may grow very rapidly. So, if possible, I do give a treatment holiday so that the patient to get at least 3-4 months of no treatment. But many times when we are forced to use something like maintenance, then I probably go to pazopanib, especially because that's the best time to try out this drug, whether it works or doesn't work. Once the disease is growing in second line, then the response rates are very low with pazopanib. Then in that situation, then we'll probably should go look at chemotherapy options. And of the options you showed, eribulin and trabectedin, here again, eribulin is way easier to give in terms of toxicity. Also, trabectedin requires a chemotherapy for 24-hour infusion, and it's much more toxic both on the liver as well as on the marrow. And cost-wise, also trabectedin is much more expensive. So, and on the other hand, the histologies where eribulin predominantly is active is the L sarcomas, mainly the myxoid liposarcomas and the leiomyosarcomas. So I would say of all the options available we have, eribulin is probably the best. I mean, the equally effective and less toxic. And sometimes if the disease is too rapidly growing and I need to combine it with a second agent, I have even combined eribulin with gemcitabine or dacarbazine. So when you're looking at combination options, even though I agree there is no major gain in overall survival, but at least the responses you expect is a little more.
Dr. T. Raja, can you hear us? Sir? So you will have to unmute yourself.
You are able to hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you now.
So sorry. I think I heard Dr. Ashish, what he said. Dr. Poonam, these are the 3 important drugs in the second line setting. I have already, Ashish touched upon this. Do you have a preference among these 3? Would you want to say between these 3, what would you be your liking?
So if there is a slow growing tumor and if there is something like a maintenance treatment only that I would like to give, patient is not very symptomatic, I would go with pazopanib as the first choice. Second, if the patient is symptomatic and I require some faster response, then eribulin, trabectedin would be my last choice for obvious reasons.
Between their toxicities, do you have a choice, madam? Do you think something is easier, something is between the
all have their own set of toxicities which could be difficult to manage, but generally pazopanib, eribulin, both are well tolerated.
Okay. Kripashankar, I have put a provocative paper here. This is a paper on gastric acid suppressive agents, they are collectively called as gas. And if they are given, the pazopanib effect is really marked. So the overall survival comes down from 12 months to 8 months, and the PFS is also halved. So we do this Pantocid prescription or whatever is happening left, right, and center. I think every patient will come with a PAN 40, whatever. What do you think, Dr. Kripashankar?
Absolutely, sir. But just before we get there, sir, I mean, like, if you look at it, for me in the second line setting, I would look at liposarcomas versus non-liposarcomas, because the pellet study did not look at including any liposarcomas. It is only in non-liposarcomas. So to me, pazopanib is an option in the non-liposarcomas group. L-type sarcomas, I have to choose between trabectedin or eribulin. Eribulin would be my go-to drug as well. But I'd also like to highlight that trabectedin, the cost has come down because we now have generic molecules that are available. NATCO has the drug. So the cost has actually come down as well. Probably, yes, the other issues are you'll have to give a 24-hour infusion, a central line and all that. Definitely. And getting back to your question on pantoprazole, sir, I think this is something that we've seen even with imatinib and all that, because even with the CML TKIs, which we tend to use much more commonly as well, we're getting to see the same effect. I think that's like become a reflex for many of our practicing physicians as well, where we reflexly put them on either a PPI or a H2 receptor antagonist. So I think that's something which we'll really have to keep in mind because of the significant drug interactions that can happen, and that can take away from the efficacy of the drug. So I think we'll really have to be mindful about that fact before we actually pen down another pantoprazole or Rantac.
Thank you, Dr. Kripashankar. Since you talked about trabectedin, we are cancelling your dinner today. Okay. So anyway, these are the little benefits of eribulin. But Bhavesh, I have just put in the most important significant advantages of eribulin, and particularly in liposarcoma, particularly clearly showing overall survival benefit in post two-line therapy, so on and so forth. So what is your take on eribulin, Bhavesh?
I had used, especially in liposarcomas, where I had wonderful results, and as in your slide also, it shows that it has a wonderful overall survival and with less side effects. So I feel that it is a patient-friendly agent, and we should use this type of molecule in a second line or even the previous two line. As Dr. Poonam Patil tells that if we already use pazopanib, then I still feel that once disease becomes a little bit more aggressive or patient becomes symptomatic, we can use still that post two lines eribulin also. So my take-home message for eribulin, I am definitely happy with eribulin, and especially want to use as a second line or in a symptomatic patient.
Thank you, Bhavesh. And Ashish, can you explain to us what is this trimodal modulation, so on and so forth? What is this? These are extended benefits of eribulin. Can you explain on this, Ashish?
Yes, sir. I think when we look at the mechanism of action, we know eribulin is again a microtubule inhibitor, but then it kind of, in addition to in the helix, it kind of it blocks it a little bit more strongly. But just I think a lot of this work probably comes from the study in triple negative breast cancers, animal models, where they have tried to see how is it different from other taxanes, and they said they attribute some of its effect on the EMT, the epithelial mesenchymal transition effect on the stem cells. And they have again some animal studies to show that these are probably better than other taxanes, and also its effect on the vascular remodeling and kind of being pro immunogenic for the tumor in the tumor microenvironment. So these are the two additional action. I mean, in sarcomas, when you compare it with docetaxel versus eribulin, maybe these are these points can be in favor for eribulin.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ashish. Poonam, Dr. Poonam, all the panelists emphasized on choosing according to the subtypes of the sarcomas. I have put in here the Oncology 2018 paper on why these should be chosen on individual subtypes. Your comments on individual subtypes and choice of agent, Dr. Poonam.
So I should confess that trabectedin is not a very favored drug in my practice because of considerations of the cost initially and the 24-hour infusion and a central line. But apart from that, all sarcomas, depending on what treatment they have received earlier, we assume that they have all received anthracyclines and gemcitabine and docetaxel. And this is then the third line therapy and so on. I think
in a port infusion, that's another big trouble with trabectedin. That's
yes,
convenient ease and all that. But anyway, this is the what do you call that, differential choices as what well-published authors would do. But most of the panelists did say about this, so nothing new. Moving on to what's new in this field, immunotherapy in soft tissue sarcomas. So what is your comment on immunotherapy, Dr. Kripashankar?
So I think this is a very early data yet, sir. I mean, we only have phase 2 data. We don't have any randomized phase 3 evidence as of now. And if you look at the numbers also, they're not great. I mean, like just a few patients included on those studies. I think that's something which is an area of, still continues to be an area of active research. And we don't have any drugs that are currently approved as far as soft tissue sarcomas are concerned. Maybe tumor agnostic therapy, somebody with a MSI high tumor, if you run out of options, you could probably try pembrolizumab in those subgroup of patients. But other than that, I don't think right now there's any proven role for immune checkpoint.
So what is your comment on palifosfamide and ivofosfamide? While you are talking about this new, talk about these two also, if you can.
Yes, sir. So again, there were also other drugs that were looked at in this setting. But again, unfortunately, none of them were actually proven to be efficacious as well. And hence, they're not approved options as well, sir. So they were all negative trials, and they go on to highlight just the fact that they're absolutely not approved. So I haven't. I don't think anybody has actually used that as well. So.
Absolutely. I think no further development, and at least on ivofosfamide, palifosamide is still surviving, and it is trying to another drug that is aldoxorubicin, something like that, and selinexor. So I really don't yet have an impression on this. But then there are some other emerging options. Dr. Bhavesh, we talked about the type of sarcomas and then trying to choose. But then we now have to go deeper than that, and as much as possible, get into NGS and look at what do I have. Most of the time, the trouble is they have something very non-specific, but if they have such targets, we can choose such agents. So your ideas about these options and your idea about using molecular triggers to choose the choices, Dr. Bhavesh.
Yeah, as other speaker also told, like Krupa Shankar is or Ashish Singh, that ortho-onco or ortho, I am also in Selby Hospital where ortho-onco is more, where giant cell tumor of bone when comes, then again the denosumab has a wonderful activity against such type of molecule. So I think if we do NGS, we do in so many times, but again, that is more like where we had almost exhaust our standard option, and then such type of target like imatinib in GIST and denosumab as well as anti-VEGFR in alveolar soft tissue sarcoma. So I think we are moving ahead, or the newer development is more and more towards NGS, and if able to achieve some targetable mutation and then to target that type of specific histology, I think then we can move ahead for treating such type of sarcomas.
Absolutely. But Dr. Ashish, my trouble is that once you start doing NGS for sarcomas, most of the time we end up getting P53 or, that's the problem. And then some of them, which are absolutely kind of really wild horses and nothing to target. So that's the common, that's the norm in sarcomas. So what do you think about going deep molecular and trying to do something in sarcoma?
Yes, sir. I think NGS probably isn't very useful. I think what's more useful there is to identify these particular subtypes. And the list you have right now put up on the screen, these particular subtypes, what an experienced pathologist can actually tell you this, and sometimes they can have their specific immunohistochemistry, which you can use. So the drugs which we commonly use, like we all know imatinib for GIST and DFSP, which you have listed it down. The PEComa, the perivascular epithelioid, those tumors are mainly in the uterine cavity or in the biliary tree, where we can use an mTOR inhibitor. The other ones, as you mentioned in your list before, like the polynodular giant cell tumor, in the synovium, there again imatinib is useful. So many times it's a fusion or it's a translocation where maybe a PCR and FISH is more useful than NGS. Now, like even in alveolar soft part sarcoma, we've all had chordomas, we've all had patients who have done well on TKIs. And alveolar soft part sarcoma, maybe immunotherapy has a role in that disease, with or without a TKI. So it's NGS probably when you look too deep, you get a lot of information and then you don't know how to use that information. And as you said, the P53, the leaf from any families, and we don't have targets for them. And but having said that, whether it's not useful, I wouldn't say that. Maybe we will, once we identify common targets, new molecules can be discovered. Like for example, for liposarcomas, we have an IHC called MDM2, and there are these MDM2 inhibitors which are now in phase 3 randomized trials. Even India is supposed to get one of those trials very soon. I think the name of the drug is Miladin Metan or something like that. It's a tablet. So I think we need to look at it from all aspects, fusions, protein expression, rather than just look at DNA and NGS.
Yeah, while you are at it, Ashish, I can also ask you, inflammatory myofibroblast tumor, where would you put that? And particularly, I have the dilemma of facing patients who are ALK negative of them. And I have seen them go wildfire, metastatic and all that. What do you do with that?
So a difficult diagnosis to make. It's mainly we see it in the retroperitoneum, infiltrating surrounding structures, complete resection not possible. And ALK positivity is one of the diagnostic criteria for a pathologist to call it IMFT. So many times we have this aggressive, rapidly growing tumor, and then you have an ALK positivity, but I'm not sure in my mind that ALK inhibitor will be better than doxorubicin or chemotherapy.
I have used ALK inhibitors and I have seen excellent responses in ALK positive, but I end up seeing negative of them. So that's where I'm stumped.
Right, sir. And also among the ALK inhibitor, you don't know which one is better than the other. I mean, we have all the data is with crizotinib, maybe some with sertralinib, but we have better ALK inhibitor. But I have not found any reports of them. So again, we should be happy to have a target, but whether those targeted therapies should come first line or later lines, that's a dilemma we have in the clinic.
Okay, Dr. Poonam. Now I have listed out all these emerging trials. We have come to the last couple of minutes of my slides, and then we'll go into some general talk. So, in this one, what catches your eyes? Do you think that among these things, for example, if you think that pazopanib plus something or gemcitabine plus pazopanib, and I think Ashish did mention about this. So what is your take on the first?
I think immune checkpoint inhibitors is something that is coming up, and the drugs that are trying to improve the tumor infiltration of lymphocytes and alter the microenvironment and make it more susceptible to immune checkpoint inhibitors. Probably that is the thing that is going to come in future is what I feel. Like ribociclib, the same way palbociclib is also indicated for dedifferentiated liposarcomas. So I think there are a lot of things that are there, but I think immune checkpoint inhibitors and how to improve the immunogenicity of the tumors is what is going to come in future, is what I feel.
Perfect. So Dr. Kripa Shankar, there are some interesting papers on trabectedin plus double IOs and trabectedin plus avelumab, and Madam Poonam touched about that. So combining the immune checkpoint inhibitors, actually, particularly in P53, we had a dilemma with the patient, and then when we speak to, they are very keen to add VEGF inhibitors to that, any form of VEGF inhibitor, apart from pazopanib, plus all that. What do you think about the emerging space here of Prakash?
So, to me, probably I'm very interested in this role of CDK4/6 inhibitors, because we've all heard about CDK4/6 expression, especially in dedifferentiated liposarcoma. We were part of a phase 2 study that looked at palbociclib in dedifferentiated liposarcoma as well, sir. So I can tell you that the results have been pretty encouraging, especially in dedifferentiated liposarcoma. So that's one area that I'm really looking forward to having an approval soon. And then obviously, like you rightly said, where the P53 is mutated, and like Dr. Ashish also rightly mentioned, MDM2 antagonists like idasanutlin, which is pending FDA approval. I think that's another active area of research as well. And again, I think combinations probably will be the way to go forward, especially when we have the histologies which are basically considered to be relatively chemo insensitive. I think that would probably be the way to go forward when you talk about a combination of chemo plus immunotherapy here as well, or even an IO-IO combination as well. So I think those are the active areas of research, and those are the things that I would probably really look forward to as far as soft tissue sarcomas are concerned.
Bhavesh, I want to ask you, this is the whole gamut of emerging options. What do you see in the near future that will become clinically relevant about all these things, and adding something like IDPEC20 along with gemdosi and CDK4/6 inhibitors, as was pointed out, is a very interesting option, plus everolimus. And the mTOR inhibitors are less used options, but you need to combine it with something, particularly if you want to combine it with pazopanib and ribociclib. So many options. What do you think is emerging, Dr. Bhavesh? Landscape.
I personally feel that IO combination with chemotherapy is really emerging. So one of important is the now or in the future, the role of IO. At present, so many phase 2 data is there. So I am expecting that phase 3 data with IO and combining with chemotherapy. And another thing is the CDK4/6 inhibitors. That is the most two promising or emerging modalities that we are seeing in next 5 years.
Yeah, so with that, I've run out of my slide talks, but I'm going to ask, each one of you some important viewpoints that you want to bring, something important that we have not covered, any one or two important take-home messages. I'll begin with Bhavesh. Bhavesh, what do you think, anything else, important pearls for all of us to learn, and something more you want to add in this soft tissue sarcoma?
For soft tissue sarcoma, I personally feel we required a real dedicated team. Is a surgeon, is a radiation oncologist, as well as my pathologist or my importance of the IHC or NGS, because more and more pathology demarcation or pathology definition is very helpful to me. Since starting of this, Ashish Singh is repeatedly telling about the various molecules depend on the histology. So, and most important is again the role of metastatectomy or the aggressiveness of the surgeon. As well, I feel that now the aggressiveness of the medical oncologist also, because sometimes a good combination or a good targetable mutation with a slow growing tumor, especially in a retroperitoneal sarcoma. So many patients, like I had simple sirolimus, like everolimus or sirolimus tablet, and patient is with uterine leiomyosarcoma and multiple cannonball lung metastasis is living for 5 years. So I think that more and more understanding of the biology and more molecule to be used in a particular that histology, I think is the key for treating the soft tissue sarcoma.
Thank you, Dr. Bhavesh. Dr. Kripashankar, so moving beyond surgery into the systemic therapy space, what is that we have not covered? What is that 2 or 3 important things that you want to convey? And tell us, what do you think, Kripa?
Yeah, sure, sir. So probably what I'd really like to touch on is the fact about the recent changes in the staging system, the AJCC 8 staging system for soft tissue sarcomas. Earlier, we only had T1 and T2, less than 5 and more than 5 centimeters. Now we have 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and more than 15 as T1, T2, T3, and T4. And especially in soft, and one important difference between soft tissue versus retroperitoneal sarcomas is that any node positive disease in soft tissue sarcomas becomes stage 4. Whereas here in a retroperitoneal sarcoma, if you have a node positive disease, it still becomes only stage 3. So I think these are probably just the 2 key differences as far as the AJCC 8 staging system is concerned. I just wanted to highlight on.
Perfect. Madam Poonam Patil, your words of wisdom. What is that we have not talked about in the systemic therapy space, or anything beyond that you want to tell us?
I think we have touched upon everything almost. Staging system was something new that Dr. Kripashankar highlighted, and I'm glad that he did that. But I think
would you want to put some, among the drug choices, would you want to be favorite on something like that? You want to say something on that, Dr. Poonam?
Not really. I think it's all histology dependent, and I think first the determination of histology is of prime importance, and after that we have to be aggressive, and the staging system that has been changed is also because whatever was thought to be uncurable or untreatable earlier, and surgeons being more brave enough to go ahead with surgeries, the size determination also has made a change in the stage. And yeah, there's something really to add on.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Ashish, I think your opening comments have still, rung with everybody. Everyone has really re-emphasized the histology-driven approach, and they couldn't overemphasize it. What is that we have not covered, Ashish? What are the 2 or 3 important
points that you want? I think we all must try to kind of figure out what the biology of the disease is, and even the same histology with different grading behaves very differently. Like, for example, if you have a well differentiated liposarcoma in the abdomen, it almost never metastasizes. Even so, in that situation, we had this discussion whether an R2 resection should be done or not. So even an R2 resection is a good treatment if it's a well differentiated liposarcoma. On the other hand, if it's a poorly differentiated, de-differentiated, then doing the surgery actually just delays the more important therapy, which is systemic therapy. On the other hand, I think as medical oncologists, we should be humble that and accept the fact that we do not have very effective options here. And many a times we try to be aggressive. I know in earlier times we used to use regimens like MAID, which used to be like even bevacizumab, and we give a lot of toxicities to our patients, and that's not worth it. We have to accept that stable disease also is a good option if it gives you better quality of life than chasing that response and PFS with adding multiple agents. And another thing which helps in these patients is involving your palliative care early and anticipating problem. Like for example, especially sarcomas in the pelvis, the uterine sarcomas, they in the later days they cause urinary obstruction, bowel obstructions. So planning for that well ahead, like even using radiation for palliation or doing a palliative surgery or a diversion, does take care of their quality of life in their later days. So these are the things which if we can incorporate right into their treatment planning, I think with whatever life they have, they should live with maintained quality of life. And this is where drugs with lesser toxicity, I feel probably plays major role in this disease.
Thank you. Wonderful. I mean, very well spoken. I think all panelists have brought about the most important issues, and they have given their insights into how they feel and treat this disease, and most important learnings and what they have collected over the many years. This is amazing to hear from each one of them. I thank all my panelists, and I am turning it over to the organizers. We are exactly at 8 o'clock, 1 minute past. Thank you, Isai, and over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. We now request Mr. Balakrishnan from ESI to please give the closing remarks. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Doctor. On behalf of ESI, sir, I would like to thank Dr. Raja for a wonderful interactive meeting, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And I also like to thank Dr. Bhavesh Parekh, sir, from Ahmedabad, Dr. N.K. Warrier, sir, from MBR Cancer Center, Calicut, Dr. Poonam Patel from Bangalore, Dr. Ashish Singh from CMC Vellore, and Dr. Kripa Shankar, sir, from Coimbatore. Thank you so much, Doctor. It's a pleasure, sir. Thank you, sir.